Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. We come to you once again with a very special Tim May podcast because we're doing this from remote locations to try to circle and then wipe out the coronavirus. Yours truly, Lettermen Row cast is on the job trying to get this done. Isn't that right, Boston? You know him as Austin Ward.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously not ideal for any of us, but as you said right at the top, we want to do our part with the social distancing, but we also want to make sure that our content at Lettermen Row continues as normally as possible. So it's unfortunate that I don't get to sit next to you and have a real face-to-face conversation the way we've done. Hopefully next week or in the next couple of weeks, we'll work out more options. But for right now, this is the best we can do, and we're going to try to make do.
Well, I know at least one guy who usually watches us is going to miss your short pants. So there you go.
Hey, I've got them on right now. You know I'm wearing shorts, so I'll take a picture for whoever needs it.
Yeah, but that's still one COVID-19 casualty right there. Bottom line is, these are strange times we live in. You know, we were on a teleconference with Gene Smith, the Ohio State athletic director, late last week when he was explaining why they had come to the decisions they had made to basically close down the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and other sports facilities at Ohio State, et cetera. And I asked him, does this remind him a little bit of 2001, 9/11? And he said, he thought about it for a second. Obviously there are a lot of differences in this because 9/11 came from right out of the, and this is a bad pun, but right out of the blue. This thing has been building for a while, but the impact on sports is going to be much greater than 9/11 was because people got back up and running to a certain extent within a week and a half of 9/11. At this point, we don't even know when Ohio State is going to allow its sports teams, and specifically its football players, which is what most of the people tuning in this podcast to learn about, are going to allow them even back in their facilities. For now, at least April 1 or April 6th is a date, but that's just a floating date out there. As Gene Smith said when I asked him the question about whether players would be required to even return from their spring break locales, he said basically they wouldn't be. So they, as we know, the spring semester is going to ramp back up Monday or Tuesday of next week, and it's all going to be online. And so players will be able to do that whether they're in Georgia or Texas or Florida or wherever they are, and probably finish out the spring semester. But these are just, Austin, what a strange time, right?
Yeah, so I think that it also, that's the closest comparison we have. When you asked Gene Smith about 9/11, I hadn't really even thought about that, but it was really the last time that the entire sports world came to a halt like this. But in that situation, you knew that things were going to come back to life because that wasn't an illness. Yeah, it was a terrorist attack and airports shut down and you had all that. But, it wasn't that long before George W. Bush was throwing out pitches for the World Series and college football was part of that rebirth and getting everything back to normal. But that was not, contagious around the country.
Right.
You had obviously the fear, but it was much easier to overcome that because, of all these other circumstances that aren't related to health and vaccines and social distancing and all this other stuff that is new concepts to me. And I think, that was a good comparison, except, there's only so much you can draw from that because this is completely new to all of us that weren't alive, for the flu in 1918. And the world is completely different since then. There's only so much that you can really draw from that. But the other part I think that's fascinating, when you ask those questions to Gene Smith, and at that point the target date was April 6th, well, everything changed so fluidly, not just daily, but within the hours last week, as the NCAA and Ohio State and everybody else tried to wrap their minds around this. But we talked to Gene Smith on Friday, and then 72 hours later, you get the CDC is telling everyone that for the next 8 weeks, no gatherings of over 50 people. Well, if you're going to have a college football practice, you have 85 scholarship players right off the bat. So
Yeah.
if that's,
Well, the beauty of a facility like the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, though, is you could practice on 3 different fields, offense, defense, and special teams. You'd have like 30, 35 apiece. But, of course, I'm being facetious. I mean, this is the I was on Channel 10 the other night with Dom Taberry, and I said, the resumption of possibly of spring practice or whatever is the farthest from anyone's mind right now. Well, I mean, football fans, that's all they have to do. A lot of people are staying at home, quarantining in place, so to speak. Yeah, they're concerned. I mean, they have nothing else to think about, so they think about the college football season, how sports is being taken away from them. But there are so much bigger whales to fry in this situation than whether or not Ohio State will ever get to finish its spring football 2020. What I fully expect, and this is just me out on a limb, is I expect the NCAA, Big Ten, et cetera, to tell teams, hey, you'll have an extra week and a half of preseason practice. You might be able to bring everybody together in a formal way instead of instead of those off-season workout ways, in a formal way, maybe by the middle of July or something, to kind of start ramping up toward the season. And as you you don't know this, Austin. You're a young man. Well, you might remember some. I mean, used to be you'd have the football season, guys would get time off, then they would go into spring football. They do a little lifting and stuff, and then they'd get time off, and they'd come back 1st of August and start working themselves into shape to play football again, And as we well know, especially the big-time programs across the country, they try to stay in 90 to 95% shape the entire year so they don't lose that edge. And that's, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes because, like we said, no one is welcome to into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center at the moment. It might as well have a padlock on it. Yet Nebraska, unless they've changed their ruling late last week, which I didn't notice as we record this early this week, they were going to allow their indoor facility and stuff to be open and available to their players. So that's even a difference right there within a conference.
You and I were, we actually talked about this over the weekend when we were, trying to figure out the latest and where things go and just the plans moving forward for Ohio State, not recorded. I kind of feel like that's, I expected that Ohio State would continue to leave everything open and available to the athletes just because the alternative then would be, trying to find a Planet Fitness that's open and then going out in the wild. Like at least if they had disease bombed the Woody and all the other facilities on campus that, as Gene Smith said they did last week, you can kind of have some control over that. And you countered with, I think, an excellent point that you're not really sure about, the legality of that. If they catch it in the Woody, I don't know. I could feel like it'd be both ways. You could try and manage the situation as best you can in the place that in the place that they're comfortable, or you just you lose complete control and send them out there because that these guys they're such elite workers and they have huge goals and they expect their season to continue as expected. They're gonna go work out. They want to be NFL players down the road. They want to win a national championship. If there are guys that are in Columbus, that they're going to try and find somewhere where they can throw the football around and work on their, everything that they're taught and their technique and all that other stuff. That's going to continue for Ohio State just because those are the kind of people that we're talking about here. But instead, and I get it. I'm not saying that anything is right or wrong. We're all trying to do the best we can in that situation. We're not doing the podcast as normal, just the same way that they're not able to go do their workouts in the Woody. I get all that, but it's just, I thought that step was a little unexpected, but it also reminds you of the severity. And I think Ohio State, you keep hearing this expression that overreaction is the only way to make sure that you did it right. I'm butchering that because I'm not a health expert either, but the only way that you messed up is if you underreact. So I get all that for them. Yeah.
But here's the thing that's different totally from 9/11, so to speak. And I don't want to get graphic here, but, you can bomb sweep the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and feel real good about it, when that was going on. You can put up roadblocks and things like that. The thing about it is, like Gene Smith said, they pretty much sanitized the Woody Hayes Athletic Center a week ago. Well, once you let people into it again, you pretty much would have to do that every day. And
you're right.
because the problem is you can't, you don't know where people have been, who they're hanging out with, who they bumped into at the store. I mean, that is the great unknown with this situation. And I'm planning on playing golf this afternoon with a buddy of mine, Paul Spahn, because I figure if we're in two different carts, we're about, and especially the way I hit the ball. Especially the way he hit the ball, the way he hits the ball, we're going to be very separated from each other. So
Yeah.
I figure two-man golf is the way I play it, at least, is about as different as you can get. We're rarely right next to each other in the fairway. He's usually in the middle of the fairway, and I'm looking. You know what I mean? But that's the point. This is the great unknown about this: is you can be clean today and tarnished tomorrow with this COVID-19 virus. And so I think erring on the side of caution, and I understand all of the explanations have been given about the more you stay separated right now, distancing, the better shot you have of at least flattening the possibly exponential spread of this thing. So I understand all of that, but it's just, man, I've been to a few stores in the last couple of days. It's crazy how people have reacted. I mean, I'm actually, your fellow man, you kind of wonder, what's going on in their minds. Like there's not going to be any food next week, and people buying up all the milk. Well, milk only lasts a little while, and so people are reacting pretty much like I guess you expect them to react in a time of crisis. Some people keep their cool, and some people don't.
Yeah, it's I went to the grocery store yesterday to help load up, and it's the stuff that's gone is the crazy part for me. I'm not the first one to observe how silly it is that the toilet paper. There's been this mass hysteria over that. I'm not really sure the benefit there, but everybody going crazy. The New York Times story. You can see the hand sanitizer with everyone, buying up every bottle that's there, at Target, at Giant Eagle, at Kroger, and there's nowhere that you can get it. And then, screw these people that were trying to make a killing off of that and jacking up the prices. But, you got to leave some for everybody else. Like if you have 10 bottles of sanitizer in your house and your 9 neighbors have 0, well, that's not going to help you if they all get sick. So,
right.
I think that we need to be cognizant of that and sharing. I'm not here to preach on that stuff. That's really not my place. You and I are not health experts, although I think we've all done way more reading and watching and listening to that than we ever have, at least for me in my entire life about this stuff. Because you can't look at you can't not look at what's going on around the world and see how severe this is and how deadly it can be. I don't want, my parents were asking about daycare for Liberty. And it's like, well, you guys need to stay put. I don't want to risk if I'm carrying it and you guys are at an age where you might be in jeopardy. I don't want to pass that along to you. Or like if I did, think about how devastating that would be if you gave your parents or, your significant other, something that they had a health complication for and that took their life. Like this is it's a life and death situation. Lettermen Row covers Ohio State football, and we're going to try and keep doing that as best we can. I don't want every time you and I talk to be about the coronavirus, but right now when it's so new, you can't help it. I mean, this is dominating and changing everyone's lives, and we're all still trying to wrap our heads around what that means because this is a completely foreign situation for all of us. We've never been in this situation before. It's not the flu. I know that not everyone has been on board with doing this social distancing or whatever right from the start, but you have to do it right now because you look at what's happening in Italy and some of these in China initially. It's taking lives. You have to treat it seriously, and that's just where I am. And I'll get off that soapbox because nobody needs to hear me preach about that.
Well, as Bruce said, you were really up on your soap opera right there, man. You were really.
Yeah, but here's one other thing. When I go back to, I wanted to bring up this thing about the complications just from the football side. I don't want to hijack your show, but when you look at adding dates to training camp and preseason, that's why there's 100 different things for eligibility and spring sports and all the other stuff the NCAA has to deal with. Like Clemson, for example, just to compare another college football playoff team to Ohio State, I believe they'd gone through 9 practices in spring. Ohio State had gone through 3. So is everyone going to get the same amount of dates back? Or are they all going to get the same amount of time in June or July? Like these things are so difficult for everyone to deal with because you want the playing field to be even, but in some respects it probably won't be.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I mean, I think the way you do it is whatever happened up to last week is moot as far as I'm concerned. I think you look at it as more of giving teams an extra week and a half, 2 weeks of preseason practice, and maybe even break that up a little because, guys, you don't want guys in camp for 6 weeks before they play a football game. It's not the NFL, so to speak. But I think that's what's going to end up happening if, in fact, we get to the season. And I wanted to introduce a little segment I recorded late last week with a friend of mine, Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com. College sports were already in sort of an interesting crossroads from the standpoint of, I don't know, I'm not going to say revenue is peaking because revenue is not peaking at all or wasn't until this happened. But with the advent of like the Big Ten Network and these ridiculously lucrative television network packages for these conferences, how the revenue has kept climbing for the most part, but the casualty in this is the live fan. It does appear from the standpoint of once again across on an average situation, attendance at major college football games last year fell again. I'm talking about live attendance, and I know there were games in the Ohio Stadium this past year where we saw some pretty decent swaths of empty seats, at up in the upper reaches, and that appears to be a slowly building trend for college football of the live crowd, just incrementally staying away because you can see it. Maybe you can see it better on television, et cetera. But I wanted to just get into this little recording I did with Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com, who did a pretty long, lengthy, in-depth piece on it for CBSSports.com last week. And when we get back, Austin, we'll discuss that a little bit and then get into a little bit of Ohio State football news because you know what? Maybe life is slowed down to a trickle, but it's still trickling, when it comes to Ohio State football. But we'll be right back after this recording I did with Dennis Dodd of CBSSports.com.
Well, we're back with Dennis Dodd of CBSSports.com. Dennis Dodd, welcome into the Tim May podcast once again.
Tim, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
You know what piqued my interest, man, was that story you had last week on the decline of live attendance at college football games, major college football games, especially around the country, and just give folks a little bit of an overview of what it is you've. It's not as much you've discovered. It's like you keep going to this vein. I think almost every year you've been chronicling it. That maybe the demand for people, whatever you want to call it, to go to games live has been slowly on a what I call it, a recline, right?
Yeah,
decline.
A decline. Yeah, I got into it about 3 years ago when I just started looking at the numbers, and they're available, but it's not that easy to find them. The NCAA has them, the schools have them, and 3 years ago the headline was it was the largest per game decline by average. I think it was 1,400 fans per game over all divisions, bowl games and playoff in 34 years in FBS.
Yeah.
Last in 2018, it was lowest attendance in 22 years, and now it's declined again for the 8th time in 9 years. So it's the lowest average attendance since 1996, since Florida and Nebraska were playing for national championships. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. But we can talk about those. But those are the headlines that got me going.
As you look at this stuff, and like I said, you've been chronicling this for a while. We've all been anecdotally watching it. At different games this year at Ohio State, there were sections in the upper decks, especially of the stadium, that weren't full. You could see, even though crowds of over 100,000 might have been announced, et cetera, around the Penn State games. You saw that a couple of times just around the country. You saw it. If you could put your finger on one thing that's causing this more than anything else, what do you think? And we're talking about live attendance, because we'll get into what that means, as far as the budget goes for these schools and revenue. But if you could put your finger on one thing that's kind of stood out to you that could be a primary cause for this, what would it be?
It's about 20 different things. Actually, it's everything. But I think college, I will say this, it's the college, I guess, administrators falling behind in making the experience better. Mm-hmm. In other words, and that dovetails into, it's easier to stay home with an 80-inch TV and have free beer and not park and face crowds. Students want connectivity. What I was shocked to find out in this latest story is not every stadium is wired for Wi-Fi. I just assumed in 2020 that was the case. But if you're not wired, or you're not wired properly, that's a really good reason for not only students but fans to stay away. They want to check their phones all the time. Yeah. So the idea in this day and age, forget the demographics, Generation X, Y, Z, whatever, is to make the stadium experience as close as you can to the home experience. Sometimes that's impossible, but sometimes that just means putting seat backs on bench seats. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
At some places. And so they've fallen, I think, way behind in that.
It's funny because the national championship game in 2014, which, early 2015 at Jerry's World, in Arlington, Texas. And, modern day press boxes aren't exactly on the 50-yard line anymore. No. And so you're down in the corner of the end zone. I guarantee you, I watched 80% of that game on the big screen. It was hanging from the ceiling. You follow my drift?
Oh, I did. Yeah.
I think Jerry Jones and his group were kind of ahead of the curve when it came to, you've got to address the fact that everybody can be sitting at home, watching either on their 32-inch meager screen or their, like you said, their 75 or 80-inch screen, and see the game a lot better than sitting here. Hey, unless we put a big TV in the place. And of course, with college football, Ohio State's got a huge screen. Texas A&M has huge screens around the place. I mean, around the country, they've tried to, for example, keep up with the Joneses in that regard, pardon the pun. But, it's what people don't understand is going to a college football game is like a 5-hour commitment or 6-hour commitment if you're going to a big-time major college game, because you got to get there 2 hours before the game starts just to find a decent parking place. And if you stay through the duration of the game, that's 3.5 hours. So maybe it ought to be a 6-hour commitment till you get back to your car, That's a lot to ask of people in the modern day who, number one, have other things to do. Number two, have access, like you said. But number three, and then in the modern day, you've got a telephone, you got a cell phone that you're trying to watch other games on while you're watching that game, right? So, you're right. And then, Ohio State, I know, has enhanced its Wi-Fi component at its games, and I think there may still be a few complaints about that. But here's let's get to the nut of it. Ohio State, Michigan is still a huge draw. Ohio State, Penn State was a huge draw last year, obviously, as you and I talked about. Yeah. And Texas LSU. I mean, that game, let's talk about that game for a minute. Jim Burrow, Joe Burrow's dad and I were talking about the week after, and they were way up in the nosebleeds or wherever they put the opposing teams or the visiting teams' parents and stuff. But the place was just crazy. But to duplicate that on every Saturday is quite difficult. And yet Texas did. They benefited greatly from that game. Talk to people about that, man. Yeah,
the top programs that are getting increasingly away from games. Yeah. The model, the equation that was presented to me is, okay, let's say you have 6 home games, and we're talking about 3 or 4 in conference, and then 2 or 3 you can play with.
Yeah.
Sometimes 4 in non-conference. You don't of those 6, you don't want any more than 2 stinkers, and even then you might be pressing it. Not every school can do that. The Sun Belt schools have to go play guarantee games. We get that. But what's becoming obvious to these Power 5 ADs is it's more attractive for the fans to schedule those big games and take a risk of a loss than it is scheduling a win.
Yeah.
To fill up the schedule, because now you're in the entertainment business. You're trying to get people to buy season tickets as a block, and if that's more attractive than it was the year before, and if you go out and get these games and you're seeing it, I'll name the schools: Florida, Georgia, Texas, Alabama. I think Ohio State might be in there. They've got this loose consortium where they're trying to go out and play each other to take care of each other's home schedules. And the bigger part of that is, the loss, not the losses be damned, but if you project out, we're going to have an 18 playoff someday. And if you play a strong schedule, it's going to make it a lot easier to get in the playoff, in an 18 playoff, if you're 10-2.
Yeah.
If you play a strong schedule. And I think schools have already thought out that far. We're at least 6 years away from that even consideration.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why every time these schools announce, "Hey, we've got a home and home in Texas in 2035," people lose their minds. Yeah. I know on our site, page views are unbelievable. Yeah. It's free PR. People get excited about it.
Yeah, 2035, man. I'll be.
I'll
be 80.
I hope I'm still here.
I'll be 81 years old, man. I will definitely be watching a game on television.
Yeah.
But get back to that. That Texas LSU game. Just just anecdotally, what you heard. I mean, there were 110,000, 116,000 people there or something. But explain to people what that means exponentially from the standpoint of concession sales, etc., parking sales. You know what I mean? Just
yeah.
Go ahead.
100. The figure that was given to me, you have to understand. Darrell K. Royal / Texas Memorial Stadium only seats slightly above 100,000.
Right.
I was told by those who would know there were 116,000 people in the stadium that day, basically hanging off the rafters and the tunnels and everything else to see that game.
Yeah.
Call your local fire marshal if you have a problem with it. But to that point, obviously you had ticket revenue. You also had concession revenue that day of $2.5 million alone. I did the math.
Crazy.
That's about $22 a person. And that's not insignificant money for any athletic budget, Texas or anybody else. And so when you get more of that, you have to win. But anybody in marketing, in athletic marketing, can tell you, if you are marketing wins, you're behind the 8 ball, because you can't always do that. Yeah, I guess at Alabama and some others, Ohio State, but you better have a plan in place. You better make that thing attractive when you aren't winning 10 every year.
Dennis, this is the first year, this past year, because I'm semi-retired now, but the 2 off weeks, I didn't have to worry about doing a feature for the Dispatch, on Sunday.
Yeah.
I mean, this past year, I went to the Alabama at Texas A&M game, largest crowd they'd ever had for a game at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
And to go and get in line for concessions, number one, it's kind of a pain in the butt to walk across the people in front of you or sitting on the same aisle with you are, or the row you are,
sure,
just to go down, and then you get in line for concessions and or the bathroom. But I went to the Notre Dame Virginia Tech game, which I think actually broke the string of consecutive sellout games for Notre Dame. I think it did. It was in November. And I'll never forget, I left my seat late in the first quarter to go to the restroom. Went to one restroom, the line was wrapping around. Went to another one, got in line, and spent 25 minutes waiting to go to the restroom. Yeah. So I missed the end of the first quarter and the half of the start of the second quarter. And then I went to get something at the concession stand, and then the line was so long there, I just said, I don't need it. I was freezing, it was cold,
Yeah.
So that's what fans, you get kind of a taste of what fans are dealing with as, on a weekly basis. And like I said, at Alabama, Texas A&M, it was worth it. Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, obviously, it wasn't worth it for a lot of people to show up because it wasn't even I don't think it was a sellout, and it was not a full stadium. So that's kind of what the dynamic is that the college administrators are wrestling with right now. You can have a pretty good game that people aren't as interested in as the big games, but you can't play big games every week, right?
You can't. And to that point, there's a struggle, and I'll call it a struggle, within college to, I guess, try to find a way to create what I call the premium seat. I'll give you an example. Yeah. At USC, as many problems as USC has had, they did a good thing there. They retrofitted the Coliseum, went from 93 to 77, new press box, huge new club level, where they created in the entertainment capital of the world a new experience. Yes. Hey, let's go on the club level. Let's sit inside when it's cold, and it does get cold there. Yeah. Let's do that. The problem is very, very few schools can do that. Because most of these, I don't say most, but a lot of these stadiums are on campuses where, first of all, there's no room to build a new stadium, so you have to renovate. And even if you want to renovate, a lot of them were built during the Depression. So you just have to do as good as you can. In the pros, as new technology comes along, I look at that new stadium in Santa Clara where the 49ers play.
Yeah.
The 49ers just built a new stadium and completely wired state-of-the-art. They can't do that.
And one side looks like an office building too, though. It's like it's interesting. Go ahead, though.
The press box is. A&M, you referenced A&M a few years ago. They just dropped the west side of their stadium, demolished it, and built it up to 102,000 to make sure they had the biggest stadium in Texas.
By the way, that is an impressive stadium. I went to games there in the early 70s, mid 70s, and now
Kyle Field.
And it was always a huge stadium. But what they did, ought to almost be like a little bit of a blueprint for what some people should do. But go ahead, finish your.
Yeah, no, well, Texas A&M's an outlier because very few can build 102,000 seat stadium and fill it. I mean, the master plan was to be able to expand to 120,000, and they don't have that capacity. I don't think. Maybe they do. Somebody said, yeah, even that's going to be really hard to do here. But I did the story a few years ago. The reason this all came about, they had to raise $486 million to do this.
Yeah.
You can build a stadium and a half a lot of places for $486 million.
Brand new. Yeah.
Brand new. So it came along at the momentum to raise the money, which they did, came along at a time when Johnny Manziel won the Heisman. The price of oil hit $100 a barrel, which is very important to those engineers at A&M.
Yeah.
And sounds pie in the sky today, given the market. But all that came together, and they were able to raise that money fairly quickly and got that put together. And they made damn sure that it was, one seat bigger than Texas.
Yeah.
So they have the biggest, and it's a little bit, I think it's a few dozen seats bigger, but bigger, the biggest state in Texas, because that's what they wanted to do. Not everybody can do that, but you get what's happening here. It's hard to create that premium seat, which leads to that experience, which keeps people in the stadium.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I'll never forget, I was sitting with Andy Geiger one time when Ohio State was going into its $200 million expansion retrofit for Ohio Stadium. And I said, well, why don't you just, instead of spending all this money here, why don't you just take and build it over at the corner of Lane and Kinney Road? There was this huge, and he goes, and he basically said, do you know what it would cost to replicate the footprint of Ohio Stadium, in all of its quote unquote grandeur, et cetera, et cetera. And he was right. I think for the most part, they did a great job, by the way, of retrofitting Ohio State, and the suites they've jammed in there, and yet they've kept it, the arch look, pardon the expression, Archie Griffin, the arches look, they've upgraded a lot of things, but a lot of stadiums haven't kept up with that. Now, but I want to jump ahead to something though. The interesting thing about going to or not going to college football games, it's not a one size fits all, as you pointed out in your story. Right. I mean, Kansas was what? Kansas attendance increased better than anybody, I think, in the country last week, and they didn't have a winning last year, but they didn't have a winning record, but they had the Les Miles effect because they suddenly had shown themselves to be competitive, and those people, that's all those people were clamoring for, was at least make us competitive, obviously, and they jumped. How do you explain that?
Well, that's what I referenced before. Yeah, they want to win with Les Miles, but they knew they could get an immediate bump some kind of way with him. But I think it exceeded everybody's expectations at Kansas. Like you said, Kansas, little old Kansas, led the country in attendance increase, going, I think it was 14,431 per game. So they were up to 33,875, a modest number, but still for Kansas, it plays in a 50,000 seat stadium, and it's absolutely horrible. They were 3-9 last year. They improved a little bit, and it was the Les Miles effect. One of their officials told me that the city of Lawrence, their economic impact for home games went from, what was it, 14 million to 27 million.
Yeah.
Just because of this. There are more people that want to be there. Now, will it be the same next year? I don't know, but it served its purpose. I mean, Les Miles brought some cachet that other coaches wouldn't, and they made a lot of money off of it, frankly.
I think what you meant to say there is less is more.
Less is more. Yes.
Less means more. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, they even attributed the success to this. I don't know if people have seen it. The streaming series on ESPN Plus, Miles to Go.
Yeah.
And they contracted with a producer who's very good. And I thought it would be like a 3-part series. It went the whole season.
Oh, it was excellent.
And it's pretty fast.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
You know, Dennis, you're like me. I mean, even when things are controlled in those kind of like series, if you really watch, you can see a lot of stuff you didn't know. You know what I mean? I mean, you can.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there are all kinds of ways. I mean, that's why a lot of the big time schools don't let you really do that. I'll never forget 2 years ago they did a preseason thing with Alabama, and I'm sure you watched that. And all of a sudden, they showed this one video of this morning staff meeting. And I can't remember how many guys I counted in the staff meeting with Nick Saban sitting at the head of the table. But I'm just going, this ain't 1970 anymore. It was crazy how many quality control guys there are in the world
all
anymore.
Those analysts, everybody. Yeah,
but,
I remember that.
Just one touchdown is all they needed against LSU. Stop one scoring drive, and they'd have been. But those guys couldn't come up with. Hey, real quick though, before you go, Ohio State. I'm not going to say guilty is not the right word, but when I first moved up here in 1976, the ticket prices have just like continued to escalate, for all kinds of different reasons. I called it every time they needed a new oil well, instead of having oil, they would just increase the price of the tickets, at places like Ohio State, maybe Michigan, Penn State, whatever. But I'll never forget, I was standing in the back of the press box with Dennis Dodd and Gene Smith when Ohio State played at Texas in 2006. And that was when I forgot what the price of the tickets were on the internet. Back then, I don't remember if StubHub was around, whatever, but I think it was eBay where you could buy tickets, but it was just over the top. And I remember standing with those guys and said, why don't you guys hold like 2,000 or 3,000 tickets back every big time game and put them on an auction site, and whoever bids the highest gets those tickets. And this was also when Ohio State and Texas, they weren't graduating. I don't believe either one of them were graduating the price of their tickets based on who they were playing, and they kind of, because they wanted to be fair to all, so to speak. Well, definitely Ohio State.
That's gone by the wayside.
Oh, dude,
that's gone by the wayside.
2 or 3 years later, Ohio State went to that model. And now, the premium ticket, last year I think it was the Wisconsin game and Penn State, and then, of course, this year it's going to be Michigan all over again. But they went to it in a heartbeat. So you may get into the Rutgers game or the Ball State game in a few years for like $60, but you'll pay, $250 or whatever to get to the Ohio State, the Michigan game. They are reacting to the ticket demand. But do you think that has a future?
Oh, the dynamic pricing?
Yeah.
That's what they call it.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think so. I think, same way Major League Baseball has done it for years, like when the Yankees come to town. I know they do that here in Kansas City. They're higher. But I think the larger question or the larger discussion is how, look, we're not talking about MIT economics experts in these athletic departments. They still struggle to find what the right price is for these tickets, supply and demand. Sometimes it's simple as that for these stadiums. You give a fan a reason not to go, They won't go. Every time I write this story that we're talking about and I post it, and I'll put it on Twitter, the inevitable reaction is, well, tickets are too high. And I want to get on there and say, yeah, but it's a layered discussion. But that's what the public thinks.
Yes.
That's the first thing they think about. I would go, but,
yes.
They don't say it's too hot. They don't say it's too cold. They don't talk about parking. They talk about $100 tickets.
Yeah.
And if you give them a reason to stay away, then they will. The other part of that is colleges in general have done a really bad job of capitalizing on the secondary ticket market. The NCAA, to its credit, I think runs its own site for the Final Four, the tournament, where you can legally go on there and get tickets in the secondary market for the tournament. But by and large, these schools don't have that, and they're just letting these tickets go away for $5.
That's what I was talking to. That's what I was talking to about with DeLoss Dodds and Gene Smith. I mean, they could have made both teams when they hosted each of those games at home and home series, which was great. They could have both made a huge premium. Hey, I want to jump real quickly though from that. But it kind of the cost of the ticket though is kind of flies in the face of, but they still sell out big time. Ohio State, Michigan, Texas, LSU. You know what I mean? And that was a premium ticket, I do believe. It just shows you that if you give people something to come see, they will pay to come see it, right? Like a Pavarotti concert a long time ago.
Yeah, there's a line in the story where I quote, I think it was a guy from West Virginia who's one of the best marketing, Virginia Tech,
yeah.
One of the best marketers in the country, and associate AD said they're still going to come for the big events. Those you don't have to worry about. But how many of those do you have? Ohio State has several playing in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But if you're in another conference and you're not struggling and your conference, your non-conference schedule sucks, you got to create the events, especially they tell me for the millennials. They don't want to buy a season ticket necessarily. They want to buy an experience.
Yes.
So let's see. You've got Barca Loungers in the end zone that serves beer, and it's in September and it's still warm. I'll go to that with my friends. That has almost nothing to do with football. So you've got to create that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, though. Ohio State and Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa, they are also, but especially Ohio State, when it goes to Rutgers, when it goes to Maryland, when it goes to Indiana, when it goes to Northwestern, that's when those teams get their biggest home crowds, and that's the effect that Alabama has when it plays on the road. And I remember broaching that subject with somebody. Well, shouldn't those schools be kind of like the LeBron James appearance fee? Shouldn't those schools be, be giving you some kind of premium for the, and they go, no, in a conference you can't do that. You've got to be good citizens because you can't have a conference without those teams too. But I think anything's on the table at this point. Real quick before you go, an athletic director, I can't remember who it was though. He used a word that I call a 4-letter word when it came to college sports a long time ago. He said, what we really are now, we're inventory for the for the television networks, and that has come to bite them in the butt. Like we were just talking about, it has come to bite them in the butt from the standpoint of those lesser games where people don't show up. They're sitting at home and watching. I mean, buddy, I'll watch 8 games at a time if I can. You know what I mean? I have that ability. If I could get 8 previous channels on my previous channel button, it would be great. But or split screen. But now it has come home to roost because we all know when you could only be on nationally 3 times in 2 years. You remember those old days, and even before that was, people were going to the game. So there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, is it? When you have the Big Ten Network paying the money it pays to these schools, et cetera, you're pretty much every game's going to be televised, right?
No, Jim Delaney turned me on to that term about the time they were establishing the Big Ten Network. 06, 05.
That might have been when I heard it too. Go ahead.
Yeah, it launched in 07, and he would call it inventory, like he was opening like he was opening a pallet of canned peas or
grocery
something.
Store. Yeah.
Yeah. He called it inventory, and then it just struck me. As these conferences expanded, it really didn't matter. It mattered that it was Rutgers and Maryland, but he wanted in the beginning what he wanted to do. Jim Delaney now. Yeah. When he expanded, he wanted 2 of these 3. He wanted Georgia Tech, Virginia, and North Carolina. That would have been his home run.
Yeah.
So what he got was a fallback, but in Rutgers and Maryland, but it was still inventory. It filled a slot on the TV schedule for both national TV and the network.
Yes.
In the Big 12, same with when they had to expand and get back to 10 with West Virginia. I submit that West Virginia was just a warm body. They had their hand raised at the back of the class. I'll do it. I'll clean the board. It's not, it's just to the TV folks and some of the commissioners, they're just numbers on a blackboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. You like the schools, you call them conference members, but what the heck is Maryland doing in the Big Ten? What the heck is Rutgers doing in the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Rutgers doesn't deliver New York the same way Maryland doesn't deliver Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
But they fill out the roster.
Yeah.
In those examples.
Well, when you put a map up, though, of the Big Ten, you can show the footprint, touching Manhattan.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's what they looked at. But what's the funny thing about it is, and this is what I talk about coming home to roost, is what's coming home to roost, I think, this year is the Big Ten Network, that share that everybody's been, that huge share that everybody's the slice of the pie is not going to be quite as big for Ohio State and others because Maryland and Rutgers, I think, are going to finally get their full slice. And I think some people, and I think Ohio State's kind of dealing with that too. They're sharpening their pencils on their budget. Might be a little bit of a shortfall based on what they've been used to, because they're not going to get quite that big a share from the Big Ten Network, until maybe the next negotiation or whatever comes up. And
but you know what? That's 2 years away.
Exactly. But they're all
they're negotiating right now. I guarantee you. So it's going to go up.
But they're all looking at it, and they're also dealing with the phenomenon that you pointed out in your story, the lack of people showing up at games. I mean, we're not talking about a desert, but we're talking about, you lose 10,000 people, like you said, times 20 at a home game. Oh, I don't know. What does that add up to? Anyway, that's the amount of $200,000. That's the amount of, and that adds up over 4 or 5 games. I mean, of just pure revenue that you would have gotten just from concessions, not to mention parking, etc. And poncho sales. So
I'll tell you a quick story about that. There's the numbers that you read in those attendance figures are only the number of tickets distributed. They are paid for. Either season tickets, buy them that week, day of the game. What schools are concerned about, and they don't have to report, are the day of game tickets scanned, where you just go in your ticket. That's the real attendance. Those are the butts and seats. There was, you can probably figure it out when I tell you, there was a Big Ten school this year that routinely has 100,000 seat stadium, not Ohio State.
Right.
That for a Rutgers game, bad opponent, scanned 43,000 tickets.
Wow.
Now that what will be reported to the NCAA is probably something around 100,000. Yeah. Because that's how many season tickets and people paid for tickets. That many people stayed away that week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's somewhere. I think that school might be somewhere between Ohio and New Jersey, but I may be wrong on that one. Oh my!
That's a good guess. That's a good guess.
Hey, real quick before you go, the last thing I know I've said that 3 times, but that's my calling card. I was really the number that intrigued me when you listed the Power 5 averages, and then you listed the next 5 averages. For the average per a conference game or the conferences was the MAC averaging, I think, 15,550. That number sticks in my mind.
Yep.
Dennis, where I went to high school in Lufkin, Texas, in 1973, they built an 11,000 seat stadium, which was packed a lot of the time. If you follow my drift there, I mean, in Texas,
I know what you're talking about.
In Texas, there are high school stadiums all over the place that could hold an average MAC crowd. So I'm not sure. That's the funny thing about all this is when we start juggling these balls, the Mid-American Conference is considered Division I, just like Ohio State is, or just like the Big Ten is. Ohio University is considered Division I, FBS, just like Ohio State is.
Sure.
You could not hardly get more polar opposite in terms of turnout, and you know what I mean, budget, whatever you want to call it, stadium size.
And it's in name. It's in name only. Right. And if there does come a day, and I didn't get into it much in this story, that those Power 5 teams decide to play just each other because of what we're talking about, they can keep the seats filled. Then where does that leave the MAC?
But here's the rub. Here's the rub about college football. It's all about pride. My team's better than your team. And as I've said this a million times, written about it and talked about it on my podcast, etc. If you just go all Power 5, let's say you started a 60-team super conference, you know what I mean? Half of those teams are going to have losing records. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And the view from the top won't be quite, you'll be from the middle floors of that high rise, And
I've always said that. If you do a top 65, because that's what the Power 5 is right now, 65 schools, and every given Saturday, half those teams are going to
lose.
So what do you got? You know?
So
you almost need those group of 5 to fill things out. And coaches, Nick Saban is the guy most, we should play all, he's the one the most vocal about it. We should play all Power 5. Well, Nick, you can, you can go get, I don't know, pick somebody, Colorado State. Well, or not Colorado State. Go get somebody from a Power 5, bottom of the Power 5, and play them and still go 12-0. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah, but meanwhile, Alabama's routinely, and you know me well enough to know I grew up an Alabama fan. I grew up in Alabama, and then we moved to Tech. But they routinely have that, whatever that opponent is, they call it before they play Auburn every year. Their warm up. Their catch their breath. Their catch their breath weekend. But I know that
the bye week.
The Charleston State or somebody or hey. I'm not, the speech he gives that every year to the media about that. But anyway,
he lectures us. Yeah.
Hey, Dennis, always appreciate it, man. You're one of my favorite guys out there, and you're still in my Power 5, man. And I appreciate you coming on. And by the way, CBSSports.com, and then that's where they can find you. But also, you guys during the tournament, especially this basketball tournament, talk to me about y'all's streaming service.
Yeah, CBS Sports HQ. This is February was the second anniversary, and I as a consumer, to me, it really is just awesome. It's the production quality is great. It's 24/7. It's free, and it's on the site. You can get it on your TV too if you have internet access. And it is. I tell people it's what ESPN News used to be. So if you want to check in at any time, get the highlights, find out what's going on. It's there 24/7. You get up in the morning, see your NBA team, NHL, everything that happened in a few minutes. It's great.
Oh yeah, I know. And then on top of that, what are you hearing, man? Do you think the coronavirus? Do you think the NCAA? You think there could be something coming out in the next week or two about attendance at games, et cetera? What are you hearing?
I think the next step as we record this on Tuesday. I think the next step is that they will probably close locker rooms to the media, which really doesn't impact the public. I don't know if we're there yet in playing games in empty arenas. I thought it was a very, compelling step that on Tuesday, the Ivy League canceled its tournament and canceled spring practice in football.
Yeah.
So, and this thing is not going to get better. We're not anytime soon. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And how does that impact, bumping up against all the revenue and money that the NCAA makes out of this thing? At some point, there may be a lot of pressure on the NCAA. I think one middle ground is to consolidate the venues in which they play. They play in 14 different cities. I'm talking about the tournament.
Yeah.
Into maybe fewer cities just to keep people from traveling all over the place.
Yeah,
but I would expect restrictions to happen. Yep.
I got you. Hey, Dennis Dodd, it's always a pleasure, man, and I appreciate you joining us.
Tim, always a pleasure. You're the best. Thank you.
Thank you, man. We'll be back in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen, with more of the Tim May Podcast.
And we're back, and I really appreciate Dennis Dodd for coming on my podcast. He's been on a couple of times now. He's one of the great reporters out there who covers major college sports, college football especially. And, these are trying times. They're starting to be more and more trying times for major college sports, even football, just when you think it's at its zenith, right? Right, Boston?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see, assuming that there are no delays and there's no way for us to predict that right now with the college football season. If people will be so relieved after 2 months or whatever of self-quarantine, if they, if that will help magically cure the attendance issue. Everyone wants to go back out and be in public and celebrate stuff that we had taken away. But, this was a long time coming before that point. So I don't know that will be the magic bullet, because as you said earlier on, guys that have 65-inch HD screens at home, that's a pretty good vantage point for watching the game and not having to, pay extra for beer and having your own bathroom and all that other stuff. Like I really get it. I understand what's happened there. It's sort of been, the catch-22 for schools is that they get so much money out of the television deals, but you're actually losing it on the backside with as many people who don't want to come. It's not been a massive deal for Ohio State, in my opinion, because this fan base is so unique. And, even when we're talking about there being empty patches in the Horseshoe last year, that's still 95 to 100,000 people that are turning out. 99.9% of the schools in the country would kill for that quote-unquote attendance problem. But you have to look at it. And Ohio State's added Wi-Fi. They're trying to do things to make the stadium experience more comfortable. They added alcohol sales. I think you have to follow the lead in some respects of the price is also going to be a major deterrent. And at some point, I think there's got to be a correction with ticket prices, a correction with, and this is not just Ohio Stadium, it's not just college sports. The Atlanta Falcons were a trendsetter with slashing prices for popcorn, beer, soda to manageable levels. And guess what? They're still making money. $5 for a soda is still going to net you a pretty big profit as opposed to 10. And I think there was research that found that the Falcons were doing more revenue when they cut the prices than they were off the steep prices. If you can buy more and you feel like you're getting better value, you're probably going to spend more. And I'm not here to tell Gene Smith or any athletic director around the country how to solve it. I'm not. That's way above my expertise, just like coronavirus. But I think that you're talking about health. You're talking about financial impact on people that want to be there. You've got to make it a place that people want to be, not just for the game, because anymore that's just a part of the entertainment value, and that's what people are weighing right now, especially if we're coming out of this situation where we're all going to have to be more cognizant of what we're spending for a little while.
Well, here's the conundrum. The rub, as Shakespeare would say, Ohio State doesn't have any trouble selling out the more expensive games.
Right? Yeah,
Wisconsin,
absolutely.
Penn State. This year will be Michigan at home. It's the problem is the games that people when they're playing lesser competition are the ones that are the real challenge. And the thing about it is it is a debacle to us. I mean, at least a problem for some schools, even Ohio State, because you count on certain revenue every year, and even athletically, even though you may have one of the largest athletic budgets and definitely one of the largest athletic departments in the country, you still got to pay for that. You've got to come up with that. And what you're hearing is Ohio State's having a little bit of a shortfall from even this year with its athletic budget or its athletic revenues, and so where that will. Ohio State will be able to weather that storm. But, a lot of other schools, like I pointed out with Dennis, I think the average attendance for a Mid-American Conference game last year was a little over 15,000. Are you kidding me? I mean,
they're a perfect example, too, Tim, of what we're talking about with the television deals, because, those MAC schools made a deal that moved their games to Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. And, hey, we love watching college football. That's great for us. But, if you are a student, like Spencer went to Ohio, or anybody who, just use any of them, BG, Toledo, the ones that are nearby for us, like that's robbing them of a traditional college experience, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And it also makes it extremely difficult for a Tuesday night in November for any casual fan to go. I mean, think about the weather we have in Ohio.
Oh, yeah, but just think about the alums. I mean, if you're driving down 33, at least 33 now, it goes around Lancaster and Nelsonville. But the point is, you're going to go down there and get back home at like 1 or 2 in the morning. You go to work on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. I mean, I've debated that a long time. I mean, I've actually criticized that for a while, that showing stadiums, and especially the MAC stadiums, several of them, quite a few of them are really big on the home side, as the old saying goes, but small on the other side. And then the visitor side, and the visitor side rarely has anybody sitting in it. So I'm not sure what kind of atmosphere you're really promoting by having those games like that. And so, we'll see where it goes. Like I said, I think the big boys are going to be fine. We'll adjust, et cetera. We'll figure out ways to enhance the experience, but it's kind of hard for like the smaller schools in Division One, which are considered, by the way, equals with Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera, from the standpoint of a voting block. But it's kind of hard for them to even put a lot into their stadiums because they don't have the revenue to begin with to do that, And as we've said many times, whenever we have news stories of Ohio State giving its coaches raises, people go, there's my money, there's my tax money. No, it's not your tax money. At Ohio State, it is not your tax money. It's the money generated by the athletic department. And it's all of the ways it can do that, including the Big Ten Network. And, whereas at Ohio U and places like that, the student activity fee fund pays for a lot of the athletic department budget. And that is coming straight out of the students' pockets, so to speak. And whether any tax money's involved, I don't know the accounting there. But yeah, these are apples and oranges that are put in the same crate,
Right. And that's like, if you were asking me, the number one recommendation to that situation is continuing to schedule games like Oregon, games like Texas. Ohio State knows that they have to put those games in the horseshoe. You have to, put the best product on the field. I think at some point when you talked about the apples and oranges all having the same vote at the fruit stand, I think that there needs to be a split at some point between the Power Five and the Group of Five. And I know that nobody really wants that, that you have the, Boise State stories and UCF and and Cincinnati has proven it can be competitive, but, maybe they'll make it into a group where you have 64 teams instead of 130. But the quality of the games is the only way that I think that you can really fight it. The people want to be there. You talked about Penn State and Michigan. And those games are always going to sell out. The big games from Ohio State's schedule, you can pay whatever price you want. Well, if you have a limited inventory and use part of it on, Ohio State playing any team in the MAC or any of these, lower, Group of Five teams where they're going to win by 50 or 60 or 70 points, people have grown tired of that, and not everybody. I don't mean to speak to that with a broad brush, but if everyone knows it's going to be a shutout, well, they're not going to pay $100 just to see Script, Ohio anymore, and that's
Well, here's the way I look at it, man. If you went to a Power Five, all Power Five situation, people claim they want to see Ohio State play Alabama or Clemson or Texas in the preseason instead of just one of those. Maybe give you three of those. Well, that sounds good on paper, and that will carry the day for a couple, 3, 5, 7 years. But then when you're on the short end of the stick on those kind of games, and suddenly you're sitting there and with 3 games to go, you're 6-3. I mean, people won't be so excited about that kind of thing. I mean, that's it's kind of like bending to the guy who's screaming in the crowd for one thing, and when that's not really what he wants. He wants to see good football, but he also wants to see the big time Ohio State fans want to see this as well as I do, Austin. They want to see Ohio State go undefeated every year, and if they don't, they're very upset. So it's like, be careful what you wish for; you just might get it. Hey, speaking of that. And kind of like dovetail it back into what we opened with, even though all this stuff is going on with COVID-19, the coronavirus situation, the Wuhan flu, I just said that because, I don't know why you can't express where this came from. We all know where it came from, so I'm going to express it, but and I'm not trying to be radical one way or the other. But there's still a heartbeat in the Ohio State football program, even though, as Ryan Day announced last week, they were shutting down everything to do with recruiting. As Gene Smith said, they padlocked for the most part the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Ohio State still had some news in the football front from a recruiting standpoint, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've picked up, Ohio State landed 2 guys as of the moment that we were recording this, and I would not be surprised at all. Hint, hint, if there are more on the way. I mean, by the time you listen to this, you'll know what I'm talking about, and it won't be a hint anymore.
Well, throw it out there, man. Go ahead, throw it out there for our listeners.
That's Berm's spot, but I think that I expect that when we're talking, when this is listened to, that there will be a little bit of a solution potentially for the running back thing that we've talked about so much. Kerry Combs now has already been really active and landed 2 defensive backs over the weekend. So so you got all that going on. It's kind of crazy. I think I wanted to ask Berm about this. He's got his own, the talking stuff with Spencer. He'll break all that down his podcast. But I was just, we were talking about it this morning, and it's like I think that this situation with coronavirus has forced some of these kids to stop, quote unquote, playing the recruiting game. Like if you have a spot and you know that you want to be part of Ohio State and you're not going to be able to take visits, I think they're starting to realize that they need to take that spot and let Ohio State know that they're coming, so they don't have to pursue other options. However, recruiting is actually going to work with the FaceTiming and all that. So I think, for a kid like, Devontae Smith down at Cincinnati, like that was always where he was going to go. He got, as soon as he got the offer, he could have waited. He could have gone to see other places, but, he's from Cincinnati. Kerry Combs recruited him. He's a kid who was never, ever going to say no to Ohio State. So make your decision public. Ja'Kalen Johnson from St. Louis, the same sort of situation. These kids were already comfortable and confident that was probably where they were going to head. So there's no harm in them waiting at this point, because they might not have that opportunity later on if Ohio State, they're starting to get a little bit full. I think you're looking at a potential by the end of this week where they've already got 15 commits for the 2021 class, which is the top ranked group in the country. You better, if you want to be part of it, you better get in now. And that's not a threat or anything. It's just the situation. There are only a certain number of spots. And if you know you want to go to Ohio State, it behooves you to say yes and do it, especially these highly ranked guys. And so you're talking about a heartbeat. Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, in terms of the future, they're fully alive and operational, even if they can't host visits. That proves to a little bit of how strong the brand is for Ryan Day right now. Yeah, and I think that the most interesting part of that now is if you look at that class and it being mostly done, that'll be a big help. That Ohio State doesn't have to, have a bunch of visits, worry about a bunch of this stuff while the uncertainty is going on. I'm pretty curious though how it will impact this Trey Sermon situation, where you and I, again, we've talked about running backs a ton of times, Tim, but this guy, from Oklahoma, he's been in the horseshoe and he's been effective in the horseshoe in that game a couple of years ago. This is a veteran guy from a CFP contender program. He knows what it'll take to play in the Ohio State offense. If you're drawing it up, man, I don't know how you could do any better than this guy as a graduate transfer to fill that void. He's a little bit like that Jonah Jackson dream scenario, almost falling in Ryan Day's lap.
Yeah, Trey Sermon possibility has piqued my interest, no doubt, because he is a plug and play, ready to go individual. The only question I would have is, you would be coming from a team that's perpetually, been in the playoffs, I mean, but anybody can see that Oklahoma didn't get a Jalen Hurts, I don't think, in the transfer portal yet, right? I mean, if you follow my drift. And so, and we all know that the top 2 quarterbacks in the country going into the 2020 season, if in fact it happens, is, they are Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, and maybe not even in that order. We'll see. But it's just interesting that Ohio State has become the attraction it has. It just shows during times of stress, et cetera. Ohio State just keeps rolling, so to speak, and we'll see where Trey Sermon ends up. But that would be a ridiculous get for the Ohio State right when it needs it.
Yeah, it's hard for me. Like, sitting here, I'm just wondering how it could work out any better for either party, because you have to assume that Trey Sermon wants to keep competing for championships. Well, there's only, if you look at the CFP history, there's only 4 or 5 places where you can do that realistically. And, talk about open playing time with Master Teague and that Achilles situation that we've talked about a ton of times, and Marcus Crowley being hurt until the summer, and, really only Steel Chambers and then Mayan Williams coming in the summer. Like, somebody's going to have to win that job, and it's going to be someone who's not all that experienced in the first place. So you got somebody with 2,000 career rushing yards at a school like Oklahoma. I believe the number is 25 career touchdowns. If that is available, I mean, Ohio State, that's a full court press situation. But you almost, if you're Trey Sermon, I don't want to speak for the kid. I haven't had a chance to talk to him. We're going to try to do that and get his thoughts on the situation in the days ahead. It's hard for me to see what more could be out there for him, because everything seems to line up in a way that it works out for both parties. Jonah Jackson can vouch for that. That you get exactly what's advertised, and when that playing time is available for you, it's worth your time to do it. Now, he could go wherever he wants, but the other thing to keep in mind about that with Trey Sermon is that he did take 2. He was involved with Ohio State as a recruit. He took 2 unofficial visits. He knows Tony Alford. So when you factor in all the relationships, the playing time, the competitive level, and all that, man, it really seems to point towards a good fit. But as you said, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, next week we might be back. When I come back with the Tim May podcast, we might have you on to preach sermon. I don't know if you caught my drift there, but hey, it's tough times out there, man. Puns are hard to come by at this point. Just like
you're never sure.
Just like toilet paper and bread, puns are hard to come by. But anyway, hey, well, listen, Boston, we'll be back next week, rain or shine, man, because we could, basically with the new technology we have, we could do this. You could be on Jupiter and I could be on Mars, and we could still do our little podcast here, man. And I really appreciate you coming on. Hey, any other last thoughts you have about what, just give me like in a 20-second little nugget, how you think this thing is going to go from a schedule standpoint? People keep asking me that, and I go, you're going down a tunnel with no lights, right? I mean, that's what this is. You don't know where the next turn is, and what that turn will throw up in front of you. But that's what it feels like, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, all we can do is pay attention to what the recommendations are, and then for us, and trying to apply it to Ohio State football. If they say 8 weeks with no gatherings of over 50 people, then look, the kids have to be in school for Ohio State to have football practice. I know they take summer school. That's part of the reason that they can have the 8-hour, work week in the summertime. That's, that was sort of the concession there. If you're going to work out, you need to be going to school. That's the way college football works. So, look, if they can't go to a class, if online stuff gets, going again, and Ohio State has a school year in the summer, then the NCAA can sit there and say, all right, you can start having these workouts, get back to that business. Maybe we'll give you 2 or 3 weeks at the end of July that you wouldn't normally have, and get going from there. Maybe it's the same sort of a delayed spring practice where you can only go, really 3 times a week. And then you get to maybe that 12 to 15 range. I don't, at this point, I haven't heard anything that would make me think that the college football season is in jeopardy. But, if you asked me last week at this time, I would have thought spring ball would continue and the spring game would be the only thing to get canceled.
Right.
So I know that's past 20 seconds, but I think, with the information that is out there right now, I think we're talking about the NCAA stepping in and helping football and that sport in particular get rolling again by late June or mid-July. But that's maybe July is more reasonable. There are a ton of other things that they have to weigh and consider, but I don't think that this thing, unless it gets really, really crazy and the social distancing, all that doesn't work, I think we're looking at football being able to resume as normal. And I sure hope so, because you and I, that's our livelihood, man. That's what we want to talk about, and I think we'd all like to get back to normal as soon as possible.
Amen, brother. I was going to add to that, but there's really nothing to add except that just basically keep your distance, so to speak. I would encourage people to do that, because this is a real deal that they're dealing with. And the problem is the mystery of it. You don't know where that guy you're talking to, or that lady you're talking to, where she was last and who she was talking to. And, the domino effect of this thing is pretty interesting. And so the more you can do what the authorities are now trying to tell us what to do, now that things have cooled down even in that area. I think Mike DeWine's done a hell of a job as the governor of Ohio, showing leadership in this situation. And of course, that's the one we have to listen to the most, because he's, that's where the most of the critical rulings for us are coming from at this moment, being in the state of Ohio. But this is an interesting time, Boston, and I'm sure a week from now, when we're recording our next podcast, it will get even more interesting. But until then, I do appreciate you coming on with me, Boston. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. We'll see you next week. Promise.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.